From Stone Age tools littered across the ocean floor to a legendary city of myths uncovered after a storm, here are 10 of the most amazing archaeological discoveries found underwater. Stone tools on the seafloor. There is so much potential underwater for great archaeological discoveries from the North Pole to the South Pole. One of the coolest recent archaeological discoveries that took place underwater was when researchers discovered a collection of stone tools on the seafloor that date back 7,000 years. This happened along Australia's continental shelf, and it was the first discovery of its kind. According to Smithsonian Magazine, after the last ice age, the glaciers melted and seawater inundated a third of the habitable land in Australia. Much of this underwater land is hiding archaeological secrets. The research team found 269 stone artifacts under roughly 8 feet of water. These were discovered at the Cape Brugheris Channel, and it appears that the tools were used for simple activities like cutting, hammering, and scraping. Researchers even found a grindstone that was likely used for baking bread. The tools would have belonged to the indigenous people on the continent of Australia, and it's interesting to discover that these ancient peoples had lived in parts of the country now completely submerged underwater. According to a marine geoarchaeologist from the United Kingdom's National Oceanography Centre, scientists are very interested in studying along the northern coast of Australia because the evidence there could tell scientists about how people first crossed from Southeast Asia to Australia without using boats. There was definitely a sort of land crossing, and that much we already know. But physical evidence could detail much more about the lives of the ancient indigenous Australians. Submerged Neolithic settlement. A new submerged Neolithic settlement has been discovered in Israel, and it is truly fascinating. Among the ruins of this lost coastal settlement, researchers discovered houses, graves, skeletons, and even a well. The site is called Atlit Yam, and researchers believe it dates back from somewhere between 6900 and 6300 BC. It's also submerged beneath at least 30 feet of water. This is not a new discovery. The site was found originally in 1984 by a marine archaeologist, but because of a lack in technology, it's been difficult to study until just recently. The most recent underwater excavations have found all kinds of great things, including 7 megaliths at the center of the town arranged in a stone semicircle, kind of like Stonehenge but much smaller. These stones were arranged around a freshwater spring, which researchers say was probably the site of ancient water rituals. As for how the town got submerged in the first place, scientists say the village was abandoned abruptly when a tsunami hit the region, which was probably caused by some kind of volcanic eruption in the area of the Mediterranean. A particularly cool discovery at this site was a pair of skeletons. A woman and a child were both found, and after extensive testing, they were revealed to be the earliest known cases of tuberculosis in humans. What exactly this means for history is still a bit murky, but it's definitely one of the most fascinating underwater finds coming out of Israel. The Seven Pagodas of Mahabalipuram. Mahabalipuram is a UNESCO World Heritage Site off the coast of India. It's famous all over the world for its impressive cave temples, its ancient art, and fascinating architecture. Many of the structures here are from the 8th century AD, and the entire region is steeped in rich history. But one of the local legends says that thousands of years ago, this area contained much larger temple structures. Apparently, the largest of all the temples featured 7 massive pagodas, but all of them were lost many years ago. Even some of the earliest European visitors recorded that the locals claimed that in the recent past, the copper tops of the pagodas could still be seen shining out at sea. But until recently, the story of the 7 pagodas was nothing but a myth. In 2004, myth turned into reality. After a massive tsunami devastated much of the area and water was pulled out over 1,500 feet from the shore, locals reported seeing several rows of straight stones before the water rushed back inwards. But more than that, the tsunami broke apart the shoreline and uncovered a wealth of small statues and small temples that had been previously unseen. A new archaeological survey has been conducted by the Indian Navy to see if the site truly exists, and yes, it turns out the 7 pagodas are indeed real. The survey revealed a series of buildings, platforms, and walls that could be interpreted as a larger complex. Plus, based on the style of the carvings and some coins found underwater at the site, professional archaeologists now believe that the 7 pagodas did exist but have since been destroyed. Why? Probably because of another tsunami that attacked the region in the 13th century, wiping out much of the temple complex. Cleopatra's underwater palace. Speaking of temple complexes, nothing is quite as cool as Queen Cleopatra's palace being found off the coast of Alexandria in the north of Egypt. The city was originally founded way back in 332 BC by Alexander the Great during his conquest of Egypt. And since then, the city has had a pretty vibrant history. 300 years after Alexander's death, Queen Cleopatra took her place on the throne. She had a spectacular palace, at least so far as legend is concerned, but it magically disappeared. For the next few thousand years, nothing was known about Cleopatra's palace until the 1990s, when a French archaeologist realized that it was hidden under the water in a bay near the shoreline of the city. We now know that Cleopatra's palace is real and just as amazing as history describes. Just off the coast of Alexandria, divers have found columns and pillars, ancient paintings, the foundation of Cleopatra's palace itself, and several statues that were likely part of Cleopatra's shrine and temple. There were even 2 perfectly preserved sphinxes found beneath the water. This site is not going to be restored to its former glory anytime soon, but it's still pretty cool to think there is even more to ancient Egypt hidden under the water where we can't readily see it. Another cool fact is that the team that found the foundation of Cleopatra's palace did carbon testing and found that it dated back to 200 years before her birth, meaning that she likely inherited the now sunken palace from somebody else. Vasa Shipwreck. The Vasa Shipwreck is one of the most phenomenal pieces of nautical heritage ever salvaged. It even has its own museum. It took about 6 years for the shipwreck to be found in the Baltic Sea, where she had been sleeping for 333 years. But by autumn of 1956, the shipwreck Vasa was discovered. Then, in 1961, a serious effort was undertaken to salvage the vessel from the bottom of the ocean. It was one of the first major shipwrecks to be completely retrieved from the bottom of the sea, and it was no easy feat. But what is the Vasa and why was it so important to be preserved? Well, the Vasa started her life as a wooden warship way back in 1628. She was built during the 30 Years' War to support King Gustav II Adolf's military campaign. The ship at the time was the largest ever in any Swedish fleet, and she was even equipped with an extra cannon deck. But the story of her sinking is pretty unfortunate. The ship departed, began to slowly sail for the open sea, got struck by a sudden wind, and sank before it even reached the ocean. Most of the crew and the passengers escaped, and this ship was very much forgotten by the end of the 18th century. Basically, the Vasa is Sweden's version of the Titanic, just a few hundred years earlier. Doggerland. Doggerland is a vast stretch of water between the eastern ocean of Britain and the mainland of Europe. Looking at it now, all you can see is water. You would never guess that 10,000 years ago it was home to a massive civilization of humans. But according to Live Science, there have been recent discoveries of a fossilized forest underneath Doggerland that researchers believe is physical proof that we are close to discovering the remains of a human settlement lost beneath the ocean for 10,000 years. In fact, a researcher from the Bradford University is absolutely sure that we're close to finding an ancient settlement. The most recent voyage taken to the North Sea lasted 11 days, and during that time, scientists took as many samples as they could from an area dubbed Brown Bank. Their hope is that by taking tons of DNA samples from everything they managed to dredge up during the expedition, they can get a realistic look at the types of plants and animals that would have been living there in the ancient past. This will give them a clue as to the precise location of the ancient human settlement. While no Stone Age relics have been found yet, scientists are extremely hopeful. Ancient Incan offerings. Archaeologists have made an outstanding discovery at Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This lake, which shares a border with Bolivia and Peru, was a sacred site for the Inca civilization. It's believed that the Inca people practiced all kinds of different rituals at the lake, and just recently in 2020, archaeologists pulled a strange offering out of the water that had been down there for at least 500 years. Inside the offering, researchers found a small gold bracelet and an alpaca figurine carved out of a shell. Several different universities participated in the research at the lake, and they believe that based on the offering discovered, it had something to do with human sacrifice. What makes this so interesting is that the ancient Inca actually believed that their people originated from the lake. There was even a massive ritual complex constructed on an island inside the lake. Archaeologists believe that beneath the water is a hidden treasure hoard of artifacts. While this single offering is only a slight clue as to the specifics of the rituals performed hundreds of years ago, it is a very unique find, and with more research, it may explain why the Inca needed to throw offerings, which sometimes included their own friends and family, into the lake at all. Underwater treasure. Let's take a look at some sunken treasure. For centuries, people have suspected that the coastal waters of Albania, which have gone mostly unexplored in modern times, are a virgin hotspot for treasure and sunken ships. The coastline spans over 270 miles, touched by both the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea. But because of the communist regime that ruled the Balkan state until 1990 was so brutal, anyone caught diving was to be shot on sight, no questions asked. It's no wonder that the plunder off the coast of Albania has remained untouched and unspoiled. That is, until recently. The waters are now open and looters are eager to steal all they can. Archaeologists are now in the area as well, trying to scoop up everything in sight before the looters get to it. But the issue here is that much of the wealth is only about 90 feet deep. This does not require any special equipment, and any hobo with a net can steal themselves some treasure. To give you an idea of the kind of underwater treasure we're talking about, expeditions starting in 2006 have found at least 40 shipwrecks along the coast, ranging from the 7th century BC to ships from both World War I and World War II. Many of these ships are from Roman times as well, and yes, there is definitely some treasure to be found. The biggest question is who will find it first, the treasure hunters or the archaeologists? Ancient Minoan shipwreck. The Minoans were an ancient civilization that existed between 3650 and 1400 BC. They flourished on the Greek island of Crete during the Bronze Age and were some of the most prolific traders in the region, along with Greece herself and ancient Egypt. Now, a 4,000-year-old shipwreck has been discovered in the Mediterranean Sea near Turkey that belonged to the Minoans. According to the studies that have been going on since 2007 on this ancient shipwreck, it's the oldest ever to be found in Turkey, and that's saying something considering Turkey is one of the oldest inhabited regions on Earth. The shipwreck was likely used for trading, since the entire area of Mediterranean thousands of years ago was basically just ships going back and forth with trade and war. But the researchers didn't just find a boat, they also discovered a lot of other cool stuff underwater in the region. They found over 20 submerged harbors that had been lost throughout time, probably because of rising sea levels. They also found over 400 anchors littering the seafloor that date from between the Bronze Age and the time of the Ottoman Empire. This project was carried out by 15 researchers, and they were supported by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey. The team included marine geophysicists, biologists, and underwater archaeologists, and even after several years of research, they have only scratched the surface of the amazing world living underwater at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The Zakinthus Ruins. The Zakinthus Ruins are a bit of a disappointment. What researchers first believed was an underwater city lost to time near the Greek island of Zakinthus has turned out to be a geological phenomenon. According to the report from Live Science, underwater divers investigated the disc-shaped structures hoping to find clues of an ancient and previously unknown ruin. However, everyone was disappointed when it turned out that the geological formations are actually a natural phenomenon that occurred 5 million years ago. Archaeologists from a special department inside the Greek Ministry of Culture found absolutely zero evidence of an ancient civilization. They did this using special X-ray techniques and chemical analyses. The results showed that what everyone thought were ruins were really just fossilized remains of seeps on the seafloor that had once been kind of like exhaust pipes for the Earth, spitting out methane and hydrocarbons into the water. Because of the microbes in the sediment, which would have liked using the carbon and the methane as fuel over countless years, a kind of natural cement barrier was created around the structure. This type of formation is known as a concretion. To summarize, there was no lost city, it was basically just a concrete structure where farts came out of the earth. Which of these underwater discoveries is the most impressive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, and come back soon for another informative video. Do you think that there is enough treasure left to be found at the bottom of our oceans to pay off the US national debt?